Good morning and welcome everybody to another deep dive series by Zoho Flow. This session is being requested by a lot of them and it's something interesting. So let's see what's in store for us. Before we begin, a couple of general announcements. All audience will be on mute by default. However, you can ask your questions in the chat anytime during the session. We will also be running a couple of polls. I request you to please spend some time on that and answer it. And for all the attendees, a recording will be sent once the session is concluded. My name is Naman, and I'm a product marketer for Zoho Flow. And in today's session, we'll be understanding what are the best practices to automate your workflows in Zoho Flow. We'll understand this from the scratch, where we begin with planning a flow. How do you build a flow? Executing flow. We'll also share a couple of troubleshooting points with you. And the biggest pain point that we've seen our customers and users face, looping. Let's take it one by one. We'll start off with a poll. All right. When you start building, or rather, before you start building your workflow in Zoho Flow, it's a cycle that you go through, it's a process that you go through. This diagram helps us understand your entire journey from the phase of planning to executing the flow. You start off with what are your requirements with the flow, you build the flow, you test it. Once you test, you either fail you either achieve what you wanted to achieve with the integration, or you need to debug your flow so that you reach the requirements. The cycle continues till the time you've achieved it, and then you start executing the flow. This session is going to be split between this cycle. So let's start off with planning the flow. Before that, let's understand this from a use case. I have an appointment booking app, and when somebody books an appointment there, I would like to send a message to my team about it. Let's see how would I go with it. First is planning the flow. Now that I have my use case on a top view or at a very broad way, let me see how I can start off with it. A note here, this might be a bit of a start, or rather a bit naive for a few people, but then there are a lot more people for who Zoho Flow is new. So please bear with me for a few minutes so that we can get them on pace. The first thing is I would lay out the apps that I'm going to use in the use case. I need Zoho Bookings, that's going to take care of my scheduling. I need Slack, that's where my messages will come. Along with that, I need CRM, I need sprints. But in what combination? What's going to be my data flow here? Let's see. Second is planning. So Zoho Bookings will take my appointment. So that acts as my trigger. Slack will receive my notifications in a private channel. So that becomes an action. Along with that, I need sprints where I'm going to create a task for my team. I also need CRM in two actions. One is to fetch a contact and then to create a lead. But how am I going to plan this out? How will my workflow look like? This is how my data flow diagram will be. A trigger or an appointment is booked in Zoho Bookings. I would like to check the details of the contact in Zoho CRM and check if they're a lead or not. If they're not a lead, create a lead and then create a task in sprints and send a notification in private channel. I'd like to point out here one thing, that is when you're building your workflow or designing your workflow, please prioritize your top or important actions first. The reason for that is in case a flow fails, at least data has been processed to the respective or the priority apps. For example, even if I do not receive a notification, at least I have a data in CRM and I have a data in sprints. We'll see about it in detail as we proceed through the session. Once I have understood my workflow, the data flow, let me explore the possibilities of integrating them. I can either look at native integrations, I can look at marketplace, or I can look at iPaaS, that's Zoho Flow. Once I've laid out and understood what I want to achieve and with which platform I want to achieve, the final design would look something like this on paper. That when an appointment is booked, I'm going to check if a lead exists. If it does, I would just create a task and send my team a notification with the details of the task. If not, I will create a lead in CRM, then create a task in sprints and send my team a notification in Slack. Once I have laid out all my apps, what actions and triggers I'm going to use and build a workflow, we go to Zoho Flows Builder and start building the flow. A few points here to note would be take one step at a time. By this, I mean do not clutter your workspace with multiple actions. Pick the action that you want to integrate with or is a part of your workflow and fill it in. Only then, please move to the next action step. It helps you to visualize and build your workflow in real time. The second would be renaming your triggers and actions. Here, we suggest you to do this, or rather, it's a best practice because let's say you have multiple users working together in the same organization in Zoho Flow. And if you have built a flow and your colleague would like to take a look at it, they might not be able to understand the reasoning of you using a specific action or the trigger. So renaming them helps an easy identification across the board, across users, and also for you to identify when you have a multi-step flow. Let's say you have a 15-20 trigger flow and one app is being repeated multiple times. Renaming them helps you understand and identify your flows, your actions better. The next is data mapping. Start off with data mapping mandatory fields. These fields are important, one, to proceed to the next step, two, to ensure that your records are created accurately in the app that you're integrating in your workflow. The next step is matching the right data type. Once you've matched the mandatory fields, match the fields that you would like the data to be passed from and to. Here, you need to note one thing. Please ensure that the type of data mapping you're doing is as per the field that is being shown or you're trying to map. For example, if we try to map an email ID to a phone number field, there are chances the flow might not execute as intended. There may be failures, the record might not be created properly, or there may be inconsistent data. So please do take a look when you're doing data mapping. Once your data is mapped, use fetch action wherever possible along with decision. Fetch action helps us to one, eliminate data duplication, two, it acts as a checkpoint as well along with decision. For example, when I'm trying to fetch a contact here in CRM, if the contact exists, why would I again create it? Why would I again create a lead? So that's where fetch and decision helps me to ensure that the data received is unique and not duplicated. The next would be executing a flow. Let's assume you've completely built your flow and you're excited about it. Let's see what can happen here. The first thing you need to do is test and debug your flow before you can take it live and handle actual data. There are two ways to do it. One, you can switch on the flow, pass a dummy data and see how it works, or else we advise you to use test and debug. Test and debug also would take a data entry, it would create an entry, but it would only be for one entry alone, not for multiple entries. Let's say while building the flow, you've tried to run a test and debug and you found some errors. How would you work on debugging your workflow? The first thing would be to see if the flow is switched off or on. What could happen is you've made a trigger, or rather, your trigger has received a data. but then you've not seen any information or any execution in Zoho Flow. So that's one thing that we'll have to see, that is your flow switched on or off. The next thing is history. In history, you could have two main combinations or rather two possible outcomes, main outcomes. The first one would be that there is no record created or there is no history count. The second is you have an history count. We'll start off with if there is no history count. Here you could have two possibilities. One, either the flow was not switched on, or if the flow was switched on, there was some issue with the trigger. If in case you experience this, the first thing we would suggest is to please go back to the trigger, see if it is connected. If it is, hit reconnect or hit test and see what message you get. Oftentimes, it happens that when we update our password in the application that acts as a trigger, we might have not shared it equally wherever the access credentials are given, or else you would have just revoked it. And that is when the data wouldn't be passed because the connection between the app and Zoho Flow would have been broken. So we request you to please go back to the trigger, check, test it, and then run the data again with the trigger. The second, Zoho Flow has recorded the execution. You could have three statuses. One is completed, second is processing, third is failed. First one, the completed execution. Completed execution means your entire workflow has been executed as per your design and build. The second is processing. If your workflow has multiple steps or other actions, it might take some time to execute it. That's when the status would need processing. For that, we request you to just wait for a moment and then refresh your page and see if these what the status reads. The last is failed. Now, a failed execution is when your workflow could not be executed till the end or as intended. Now, this could be for a couple of reasons. One, again, could be an actions connection might have been broken. So, as you've done it with the trigger, we request you to please do it with the action. Go back and check if the action is connected or not. But how do I know which action has failed? That's when our history function helps you. When you click on the execution that has failed, you can see a list of input output of the execution, rather all the executions and the input output of it. Here you can identify which step has failed in your workflow and then start diagnosing it. In this case, Slack, my input, I have received accurate input, but my output is not there. Rather, I have an error output, and the error reads Slack says channel not found. So, if in case there's an error or the execution fails, we request you to look at the output and see what error message it's showing you. This would help us and you to understand what is going wrong when we do troubleshooting. Speaking, okay, and once you have identified and updated the error, you'll have to apply the change so that the updates reflect in your workflow and your workflow starts working as intended. If you miss to apply changes, you would still face the same error that you had faced previously. Now, we've we worked on troubleshooting. We've tried understanding if we face an error, how we could identify it and try rectifying it. We would like to share a small guide with you that would help you be a bit more comprehensive in understanding the failures that you are facing or you have faced and how you could troubleshoot it from your end. The first is problem isolation. Problem isolation, Zoho Flow's history can help you. As you can see, the input output was able to give us what exactly was the error and which step did the error occur. It helps us to understand where the problem occurred. So we can isolate the problem or identify the source of the problem. Backtracking. In backtracking, we mean first you need to check the symptoms. Now, for example, in the previous case, for me, the channel was missing. So probably I did not map the channel right, or the channel actually does not exist. So that's something that we'll have to see what went wrong over there. Then is check the data map. It might happen that the data that you've mapped is wrong. For example, let's say uh, in the field of email, you have mapped a phone number or the person's name or the person's address. So the data type may be wrong. That could be an error with data mapping. Locate the source. Now, which actual step is passing that data? Is it the step that has failed? Is that not able to process the data? Is it the step before that? So, which step actually is causing this error across the board? You need to locate it and then error. In case you're still not able to fix the error, you could go look at the API documentations of the app and see what do they have to say. In case you do not find a comprehensive answer to your pain point, you could always reach out to the community and see if somebody else has faced a similar issue and how they figure. If even that doesn't work, you could definitely reach out to support, and our support will be more than happy to help you at any point in time. The next is looping. Looping is something that we've experienced a lot from our customers. There have been a lot of questions that we've gotten support on this, and it happens unknowingly. And that's something that we wanted to address during this session with you. What is looping? Looping is a scenario where one flow executes another flow and vice versa. So it keeps happening in a cyclic fashion, which cannot be stopped easily. And it's little difficult to identify, but you can identify your looping. Let's say if two flows are triggering each other, you would have to look at the executions that have taken place, the task consumptions that have taken place, and the records created. If these three match, it's fine. But if they don't, it means you are facing looping issue in your workflow, where you'll have to identify them and then rectify it. What are the different types of looping? You can have a bidirectional loop. You can have multiple workflow loop or multiple app loop, and looping with inbuilt integrations. We'll understand each of them one by one. Bidirectional. Bidirectional is when a workflow triggers another workflow and vice versa. In this example, we have two simple items. One is a trigger and action. So my trigger is new contact in CRM will create a new customer in QuickBooks. In another workflow, I have when a new customer is created in QuickBooks, I would like to create a new contact in Zoho CRM. So if I have two flows in this fashion, it would keep triggering each other. This would result in a loop. The next is syncing multiple apps. Let's say you have about 15-20 flows in your organization, and somewhere while creating it, you might have created the trigger of the action of a flow as a trigger of the next flow. And the action of the next flow would, one of the actions of the next flow could be a trigger of a third flow. And the action of the third flow could be the trigger of the first flow. So this would mean that three flows are triggering each other at different points in time. So for example, here, my first flow is when a task is added in Asana, I would like to add it in Basecamp 3. Now, uh, create a to-do list or add a to-do in Basecamp 3. Now, in another flow, I have when a to-do list is created in Basecamp 3, I would like to add a row in Zoho Sheets. And my third flow is when a new row is added in Zoho Sheets, I would like to create a task in Asana. So these three flows will keep triggering each other and create looping in your organization, which would result in exhaustion of your task and execution. The third is with built-in integrations. Let's assume, for a moment, you have a built-in integration or an automation in Zoho CRM, and you have something very similar built in Zoho Flow as well. What would happen is either when Zoho Flow executes the flow, it would trigger the automation in CRM, Or when the automation occurs in Zoho CRM, it would trigger the workflow in Zoho Flow. So we need to be careful of this. It might happen that somebody from your team would have set up an automation in, let's say, Zoho CRM sometime back, and they might have forgotten, and you replicate it here. It could happen. So that's something that we need to be wary of while building such integrations. How do you avoid looping? We start off by building in incremental fashion. Here, I mean, start off with one action at a time and then start building it. Second, test your development. As and when you start developing, keep testing it in between with dummy data. In case there's looping, you would be easily able to rectify it and stop it right away, either in the flow you're building or the flow that's already built, or maybe an automation that has been created in as a native integration or a blueprint in an application. Create a debug cycle. Each use case is different. Each use case requirements are different. So we advise you to create a debug cycle and try following it in case you hit looping. The last is use filter criteria, that is in trigger, or decisions and fetch in actions. These help you eliminate looping to a very strong extent, because you're only going to execute certain steps based on conditions that are fulfilled. So we've understood right now everything that, or rather, a good amount of practices that would help us to build a workflow with all these steps in mind. This is the workflow that we would come up with our original use case. When an appointment is booked in bookings, I'm fetching the contact in CRM. I'm running a decision that if the contact exists, I would like to take a certain path and execute certain steps. Now, if the contact doesn't exist, I would like to take another path and execute certain steps. So, if the contact doesn't exist, I would create a lead in Zoho CRM, then move on to creating a sprint task, then move on to sending a private message in my Slack channel if the contact exists. In that case, I would not be creating a lead, but directly moving to creating a task in sprints, followed by sending a message in private channel. We have another poll for you. All right. As we draw close to the session, I'd like to update you on the next session that we're going to have on 17th of Jan, where we would be talking about how you could effectively use different types of trigger in Zoho Flow to create your workflow as comprehensive as possible. Please do register, scan the code, and you would be taken or redirected to a registration link. Could always reach out to us at support@zohoflow.com, and our team will be happy to help you out with all your questions and queries. With this, I'd like to say thank you. In case you have any questions, please feel free to send us. You can type it out here, or you could always reach out to us at support@zohoflow.com.